The dog wouldn't move, not when the wind picked up, rattling the broken shutters. Not when the woman called him again, her voice cracking like the floorboards beneath her. He just sat there, head low, ears alert, body curled against the collapsed crib as if guarding something only he could still sense. The rest of the room had given itself over to dust and decay, wallpaper peeling in long, tired curls. A stuffed rabbit slumped sideways in the corner, its button eye missing. The floor stained where rain had crept in year after year. But the dog remained motionless, silent, as though waiting for someone late to arrive. Mara didn't understand. She hadn't planned on stepping inside the house. Not today. She'd only come back to check on the water lines after a neighbor reported hearing something odd. Maybe a coyote, maybe wind, the kind of call that pulled her out of her truck in boots too thin for the frost. She hadn't expected the dog, especially that dog. He was thin now, fur-weathered and dull, ribs showing beneath the coat that used to shine like burnt honey. She recognized him immediately. She hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, not since the day the family vanished. No official report, just packed boxes half-loaded into a trailer that never left the driveway. A calendar frozen on April, toys left in the garden like the children had dropped them mid-game and simply walked away. Everyone whispered their own version: foreclosure, midnight escape, something worse. But the dog had stayed, and then he'd disappeared to dot until now. Mara knelt in the threshold, careful not to cross it. Her breath came out in small clouds. She didn't speak, he didn't growl or wag. Only his eyes moved, following her, waiting for her to understand. Something she couldn't yet name. Behind him the crib leaned at an angle, its side splintered where the slats had broken or been broken. Beneath the weight of something, someone, it was impossible to tell. She didn't want to step closer. She felt it the way you feel an old scar under weather changed dull and certain. This room had once held warmth. Now it held only memory, and the weight of something unfinished. The silence stretched out outside. The pine trees rustled under the early wind, branches brushing against the eaves in a slow, restless rhythm. The sky hung heavy and gray, the kind of color that flattened time, made it feel like late afternoon even in early morning. Somewhere in the distance a barn owl cried, its voice thin and sudden. The dog didn't flinch. She took another breath, the kind of breath that comes just before memory rises uninvited. The girl, she remembered her now, Clara, 3 years old, maybe 4, hair always tangled, never without a crayon in hand. She'd wandered off once, down by the creek, and it was the dog who found her, standing between her and the water's pool. The dog had been loyal in a way that was almost unnerving. Like he knew something others didn't. Like he chose that family, not the other way around. Mara finally stepped forward. The floor creaked beneath her, sharp and loud in the quiet. The dog didn't move. She was close enough now to see the way he was trembling, not with fear, but with effort. He was tired, but still, he stayed. Then she saw it, half hidden beneath the broken slats of the crib, a small worn blanket, blue, with a stitched patch of sky and stars. The kind sold in bulk, but made personal by use. Its edge was clutched tight in the dog's teeth, as if he'd pulled it out, or dragged it there, or maybe, just maybe, kept it safe. Mara knelt slowly. Her knee touched the cold wood. She reached out, not to the dog, but to the floor beneath the crib. Her hand hovered an inch above the blanket. It was damp. Not with rain. The dog growled then, low, not a threat, not quite, a sound of warning, maybe even sorrow. And that's when she noticed the faint smell, old, metallic, like rust and something else, something that had been waiting too long to be noticed. She pulled her hand back. The dog's growl faded. He laid his head on the blanket, closed his eyes and exhaled. Mara stood slowly, her heart knocking once hard against her ribs. She didn't know what to make of it yet, but she knew this wasn't just loyalty, not just memory. Something had happened here that hadn't finished happening, and the dog, for reasons she couldn't yet name, refused to let it be forgotten. She turned once, looking back at the open doorway where the wind pressed gently against the frame. Light had shifted. Shadows now moved across the walls like fingers. The kind of quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was waiting. Mara didn't move for a long time. The quiet inside the house had thickened, not just silence now, but something more physical, like pressure behind her ears, in her chest. The kind of hush that sinks its weight into the floorboards and waits for someone to break it. The dog hadn't stirred. His eyes remained closed, his body curled tight around the blanket, as if conserving the last warmth of something that had long ago vanished. Outside the light had shifted again. The wind had dropped, replaced by a stillness so complete it made every sound sharper, the creak of wood, the brittle flutter of paint peeling from the windowsill, the distant caw of a crow from a far-off fence post. Mara's fingers twitched, at her side. She hadn't meant to stay this long, but something in her kept her rooted to the spot. A wrongness, not loud but persistent, like a note out of tune that her instincts refused to ignore. She glanced down at the dog once more. The rise and fall of his ribs was shallow, deliberate. He was conserving strength, not guarding the house, guarding the memory inside it. Her boots made soft contact with the wood as she took a slow step backward. Then another. The dog's ears twitched, but his body stayed low. At the edge of the room, Mara turned and stepped into the hallway. The air felt colder here. Narrow, she passed a picture still clinging to the wall, a faded photograph of the little girl, Clara, standing on a stool in the kitchen, smudges of flour across her cheeks. Beside her, a tall man, likely the father, mid-laugh, his hand bracing hers as she poured batter into a bowl. The frame tilted slightly to one side, a hairline crack in the glass, slicing through his face like an old wound. She moved past it. The hallway narrowed toward the back of the house. Here, the roof had begun to give, leaves had collected in the corners, and a faint drip echoed from somewhere above. Steady and without rhythm. She didn't know what she was looking for until she saw it. A door, barely ajar. Its frame darkened with what looked like water damage. But wasn't. Mara reached out. Her hand hovered, then pushed the door open just far enough to peer inside. The room was almost empty. A toppled chest of drawers, a pair of tiny boots with their laces undone, and near the far wall something that didn't belong, a black garbage bag, torn open at the edge, its contents mostly hidden, but not entirely. Something pale jutted from the opening, smooth oval, not immediately recognizable. Mara's breath caught in her throat. A doll's head. She stepped back sharply, the heel of her boot catching the uneven floor. Her hand went to the wall for balance. She didn't look again. She didn't want to know what else was buried in there. Not yet. Instead, she closed the door gently. Not out of respect, out of dread. And then she heard it. A sound from the front of the house. Not the dog, not the wind. Something lighter, a tap, then silence. Then another slightly louder. Mara turned. Her steps were faster now, deliberate. When she reached the living room, the dog was standing. He was facing the window. Outside, the trees were still. The sky had dimmed another shade, that slow deepening that signaled dusk was approaching. Even if it was only mid-afternoon, Mara moved beside him, peering through the Grime Street glass. Nothing, no movement in the yard, no car in the driveway, just brittle grass in the shadow of the porch. Roof stretching long and thin. The dog barked once, sharp, not a warning, a call. She opened the door. Wind stirred again, brushing cold across her face. The dog moved past her, stepping down into the overgrown yard with more purpose than his frail body should have allowed. Mara followed. He crossed the yard, heading toward the far edge, past the fence line, toward the thicket where a rusted wheelbarrow lay overturned. She remembered that spot. It used to hold a swing, the ropes tied to the low-hanging limb of a birch. The swing was gone now. Only the rope remained, frayed and hanging still. The dog stopped near the tree, nose low, ears forward. He stood like that for a moment, then pawed gently at the earth. Just once. Mara's heart slowed. She approached carefully. The ground there was different, not fresh but disturbed at some point in the past. Just enough to notice if you were looking for it. She didn't want to look. But the dog looked at her now, fully, directly. His eyes held something ancient. Not fear, not plea, insistence. Mara knelt, her fingers brushing the soil. It wasn't loose. It had been packed, maybe by weather, maybe by time, but something was beneath, something the dog hadn't let go of. A chill passed through her, unmoored from temperature. She stood, her voice barely audible above the breeze. We'll call it. And the dog sat back, tongue out slightly, chest rising and falling with effort. She looked down at him. You've been trying to tell someone all this time, haven't you? The dog didn't answer, but the rope swayed gently behind him, not from wind, from weight that the air had shifted. Mara stood in the stillness, her boots pressed against the uneven floor, and the wind that had once touched the doorway now moved deeper, into the house, slow, searching, like fingers brushing old skin. The dog didn't stir. His head rested on the blanket, eyes half-lidded but not asleep. There was something in his posture that felt like waiting, but also like surrender. As if his body had grown too tired to hold the memory alone. Mara didn't want to move. She didn't trust the creaking of the boards beneath her, or the silence that pressed against her chest with each passing second. But it wasn't fear that held her still. It was the growing certainty that she'd just stepped into something not meant to be interrupted. Like the last echo of a song, or the hollow weight of a prayer said too late. She crouched again, not to touch the dog or the blanket but to look, not just look, see. The broken crib's edges had splintered outward, as if something had fallen. In a war someone had broken out beneath the blanket, near where the dog had laid his paws. The floor had darkened over time. The stain wasn't fresh, but it hadn't disappeared either. Water damage, she told herself first. But her body said otherwise. The breath she took was thin and trembling. Cold moved up her spine. Then the dog lifted his head, not quickly, not startled, as if he'd heard something Mara hadn't. His ears turned slightly, angling toward the hallway beyond the nursery, toward the place Mara had refused to look, a narrow corridor that led toward the back of the house, once connecting to a sunroom, now long swallowed by vines and rot. She heard nothing. But the dog stood, slow and unsteady, and began to move, not toward her, away. Into the dark. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the frame of the crib as if for anchor. The dog was limping. A back paw barely touched the ground. but he walked like something pulled him forward. Not pain, not memory. Duty. Mara followed. The hallway was narrower than she remembered. The wallpaper bloomed with mildew where water had long seeped in. Fragments of children's drawings, dinosaurs, stars, stick figure smiles, peeled and sagged on the wall like ghosts surrendering their shape. Her footsteps matched the dog's limp, slow and cautious. Halfway down, the light changed, grew warmer. It took her a moment to realize why. The last door on the right, once bolted shut, she remembered, now hung open, revealing the old sunroom. Sunlight spilled in unevenly through broken glass, casting shifting gold onto the ruined floor. Ferns had crept through cracks in the wall. Moss clung to the edges like skin regrowing on a wound, and there, near the far window, sat a second crib. Mara stopped breathing. It was smaller, older, the kind used for newborns, its wood bleached and soft from water and time. Empty, she thought, until she saw the outline faint, but there of something once heavy pressing into the mattress, as if the weight of a body had refused to fade, even long after it was gone. The dog stopped near it, sat, looked back at her, not begging, not warning, inviting. Mara stepped closer. Her hand brushed the crib's edge. It was damp, pulpy. She looked down. The same blanket, not identical but matching, stars stitched across its corner, though this one had frayed badly, the color nearly gone. Her hand hovered. She couldn't bring herself to touch it. Then a sound, soft, hollow, from the front of the house. A knock, not on the door, on the window. Mara turned sharply, heart leaping in her throat. The dog remained seated, head lifted, waiting. The knock didn't come again. Outside, the trees had gone still. Mara walked to the nearest broken pane and peered through the cracks. Nothing, just wind brushing the pines, a single crow taking flight. But there, near the gravel path, tire tracks, faint, newer than they should have been. She stepped back. The dog had stood again. He moved to the crib, placed his muzzle against the edge, and let out a single exhale, then turned to her eyes steady. She understood this wasn't a place of accident. It wasn't just sorrow soaked into floorboards or a loyal animal mourning ghosts. Something had been hidden, or left behind, and now someone knew she was here. The house was no longer empty, and the story that had been buried beneath old blankets and rotting wood was beginning to surface. The air inside the house had stilled. The wind outside no longer crept in through the cracked shutters, and even the rustling trees had quieted, as if holding their breath. Mara remained standing in the doorway, watching the dog lay his head over the old blue blanket. His chest rose and fell unevenly. She could see the weight in his breathing now. Not age, exactly, but the exhaustion of waiting. A floorboard popped behind her, not loudly, but enough to remind her she wasn't alone in this place. She turned her head halfway, gaze sweeping the hallway, though she already knew the house had no one else left. Still, her hand rested on the frame. Not out of fear, not quite, but something close to it. That subtle instinct that lives in the back of the neck and spine when grief and confusion begin to overlap. She stepped fully inside now. The smell was stronger near the crib. Dampness, mildew, and underneath it, time, not death exactly, but the memory of it. The kind that lingers when the living have left too quickly. She crouched again, gently now, and lifted the edge of the blanket just enough to see beneath. There was nothing obvious, no remains, no object left behind. But the floorboards had darkened in an odd pattern, almost like a spillage, a crude outline that had faded with the seasons but never truly gone, as if someone had tried to scrub the memory from the floor but left the emotion behind. The dog didn't lift his head. His eyes remained closed, but Mara could see the faint tremor of his ears, still alert, still listening for something. Not a threat, a presence. Outside, the trees began to move again, but differently this time. The sound wasn't wind through leaves. It was steadier, slower, a rhythm too purposeful to be nature alone. Footsteps, her breath caught. She stood, quickly, body angled toward the window. But all she could see was the shimmer of light between pines and the faint sway of branches. No figure, no voice, but the dog's ears twitched, and he opened his eyes. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, he just looked at her, and then very slowly turned his head toward the narrow hallway behind her. The one that led toward the back of the house. Mara hesitated, not because she was afraid of someone breaking in. This place had been empty too long for that. It was something else, a feeling, quiet and uneasy, that maybe the house had waited to, not just the dog. And now that someone had come, it meant the story was ready to be known. She moved carefully down the hall, passing faded family photos on the wall, their glass smeared with age and smoke. At the end of the corridor, the door to the back room was ajar. Light slanted through the window, catching on the dust suspended in the air like pollen trapped in amber. She nudged the door open with her foot. There was a mattress on the floor, stripped bare, a child's drawing curled at the baseboard, stick figures with large eyes and long hands. In the corner, a small pile of flattened cardboard boxes, the kind you use when you plan to leave in a hurry, but Dan's single quotes T. And on top of one of them, a collar, worn leather, frayed at the edges, with a tag barely clinging to its ring. She picked it up, her fingers stiffened. It wasn't the dog's. The name on the tag was faded but still legible. Tilly, the girl's name, had been Clara. Mara remembered now. But she remembered something else too, something her mind had let blur with time. Clara had a baby sister, one who hadn't yet learned to walk. A quiet one, always in the crib. Mara turned the tag over. A date was etched faintly beneath it. April 3rd. The calendar in the kitchen had stopped on April. She turned back, suddenly needing to return to the main room, to the dog, to something steady. But the hallway felt longer now, the air denser, the light less certain. When she reached the doorway again, the dog was no longer lying down. He was sitting up, rigid, ears perked, his gaze fixed not on her but past her through the broken window frame and toward the tree line. Mara stepped to his side, followed his stare. At first, nothing. And then just between the shadows, a movement, not a person, not clearly, but something tall enough, still enough. Watching, Mara narrowed her eyes, but it vanished before she could name it. Could have been a trick of the trees, a play of light. But the dog had seen it too. That was enough. He stood now, slow but certain, and walked back to the crib. Not to lie down, but to sit beside it, facing the door. She realized, with a jolt, that he was guarding again. Not the crib this time, the house. She knelt once more beside him, the tag still in her hand. What happened here? She whispered, more to herself than to the dog. He didn't answer, of course, but outside, the wind rose suddenly, sharp, insistent, and somewhere in the woods something knocked once, hollow, like wood against wood or bone, and then all was quiet again. The dog didn't move, and Mara no longer felt alone. The knock, that soft, hollow sound from the woods, never came again. Whatever had been watching had vanished into the stillness. But the dog didn't sit back down. He remained beside the crib, unmoving, eyes steady on the doorway, as though holding a last line that no one else could see. Mara stayed beside him, crouched low, the old leather tag still warm in her hand. Her thumb traced its edge, and in the quiet that followed, her memory filled in the rest. Clara and Tilly, the sisters, the older one curious, wild-eyed, the younger quiet, often asleep when Mara came by to check the pipes. She remembered now that last visit, how the mother had seemed distracted, packing in frantic bursts while the baby cried in the background and the dog paced at the door. A cry that didn't stop when Mara left. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, gently, like dawn light over a long shadow. The broken crib, the empty room, the way the dog had pulled the blanket free and laid it with care. Not possession, not confusion, but grief. It hadn't been loyalty to the house that kept him here. It was duty. The kind of duty animals feel when no one else shows up to carry the weight. The family hadn't left together. Not really. Something had gone wrong. An accident, a panic, a loss too heavy to speak aloud. Mara would never know the details, but the dog had stayed. Not to wait, to protect what no one else would claim. And now he was old, his paws stiff, his ribs thin, but he had guarded the memory and the truth for as long as he could. Mara moved slowly, slipping the tag into her coat pocket. She rose and placed a hand gently on his back. His body leaned into her touch just slightly. Then, he stepped away from the crib. Together, they walked out of the house, past the toys half buried in the garden, past the window where the trees still moved, just barely, like they too had heard the end of something. She opened the truck door. The dog paused, looked once more at the house, then climbed in without hesitation. By the time they reached the edge of the property, the light had begun to change. The sun, low and golden, cast long shadows through the pines. Dust curled behind the truck's wheels, catching in the wind and drifting back toward the house like a memory returning to where it began. Mara stopped once, before the road turned. In the mirror, the house looked smaller now, softer somehow, not abandoned, just quiet, at rest. Beside her, the dog lay curled on the seat, his eyes half closed, the blanket clutched gently in his teeth, and for the first time in 2 years, he slept. The trees swayed in rhythm behind them, and a single leaf drifted down, landing on the empty path like a closing hand.